Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Supposed to be about balance today. Srimad Bhagavad-gita, as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, chapter 6, text 16. Natyashnatastu yogosti nachaikantamanashnataha nachati svapna shilasya jagrato naiva charjuna. Translation. There is no possibility of one's becoming a yogi, O Arjuna, if one eats too much or eats too little, sleeps too much, or does not sleep enough. Purport. Regulation of diet and sleep is recommended herein for the yogis. Too much eating means eating more than is required to keep the body and soul together. There is no need for men to eat animals, because there is an ample supply of grains, vegetables, fruits, and milk. Such simple foodstuff is considered to be in the mode of goodness according to the Bhagavad-gita. Animal food is for those in the mode of ignorance. Therefore, those who indulge in animal food, drinking, smoking, and eating food which is not first offered to Krishna will suffer sinful reactions because of eating only polluted things. Bhunjate te tvakang papa ye pachantyatma karanat. Anyone who eats for sense pleasure or cooks for himself, not offering his food to Krishna, eats only sin. One who eats sin and eats more than is allotted to him cannot execute perfect yoga. It is best that one eat only the remnants of foodstuff offered to Krishna. A person in Krishna consciousness does not eat anything which is not first offered to Krishna. Therefore, only the Krishna-conscious person can attain perfection in yoga practice. Nor can one who artificially abstains from eating, manufacturing his own personal process of fasting, practice yoga. The Krishna-conscious person, no one who artificially abstains from eating, manufacturing his own personal process of fasting. Nor can one who artificially abstains from eating, manufacturing his own personal process of fasting, practice yoga. The Krishna-conscious person observes fasting as it is recommended in the scriptures. He does not fast or eat more than is required, and he is thus competent to perform yoga practice. One who eats more than required will dream very much while sleeping, and he must consequently sleep more than is required. One should not sleep more than 6 hours daily. One who sleeps more than 6 hours out of 24 is certainly influenced by the mode of ignorance. A person in the mode of ignorance is lazy and prone to sleep a great deal. Such a person cannot perform yoga. This is what could be called common sense advice. Please take that book from the floor. You take it. It's not even to be a yogi, just to live life in a healthy way. One should not eat too much or eat too little, or sleep too much or sleep too little. The next verse has a similar theme. Yukta ahara viharasya yukta cheshtasya karamasu yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati dukkhaha. He who is regulated in his habits of eating, sleeping, recreation and work can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. So, what is being advocated here is balance. And seems like a very good theme, not in the modern world, to propagate not only in terms of eating and sleeping, but in our lives in general, as we are threatened with extremism. So it's better to be balanced than to be an extremist. Is it not? This balance is that Krishna recommends here. This is sattvic. That means the way of life that is conducive for spiritual advancement and conducive just for being what we might call a decent person or a balanced person. And of course, these kind of ideas are very prominent. The idea of being balanced is very prominent in what is called the New Age movement with the yin-yang and all that kind of thing. This is not a new idea that one should be balanced. You maybe have the term in German, the golden mean. Do you have that, golden mean? You have a similar term in German? Yeah, because it comes from Aristotle, who, so then it must come into all the languages, especially in the languages where there's a lot of philosophy has been discussed, which means German is one of those languages. The English didn't do so much philosophy, and they're more interested in running out and conquering all the world and all that kind of thing, making lots of money, but there were a few philosophically minded people in England also. So, the golden mean, this comes from Aristotle, and the idea is it's the desirable middle ground between two extremes. The two extremes are usually seen as one of excess, having too much of something, and the other extreme is not having enough. So, just like here, Krishna says, don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, and don't sleep too little. For instance, in the Aristotelian outlook, courage is a virtue. But if you emphasize it so much, you could become reckless. And if you underestimate it, or you underplay it, then you become a coward. So, it's good to be courageous, but discretion is the better part of valor. That's another saying. You probably all know the story of, let's look at this, Daedalus and Icarus, who were running a Greek mythology. I don't think they teach these at school anymore, but we used to hear the in our days, when I was a little boy, we used to get taught these things at school. So Daedalus and his darling son Icarus, they were running away from King Minos, who had the Minotaur, but that's not part of this story. So he made some wings, which he strapped onto the body of his son. They were held together by wax, and he put a set on himself, and they flew away from Crete. And the wings were made of, the feathers were held together by wax. So Daedalus told his son, just don't go too low, close to the sea as you're flying, and don't go too close to the sun. Stay in the middle. But Icarus thought, this is great, flying, and he went up and up and up, and as he got close to the sun melted, the hot sun melted the wax, his feathers fell off, and he fell in the sea and drowned. So the moral of this story is, what's the moral? Do what your father tells you, that's one moral. And another moral is relevant to what I'm talking about today. The middle course. This wasn't invented by Aristotle. It practically, since man stopped being a Stone Age monster, if you believe in all those things, then civilized people have always talked about having a mean, being in the middle ground. In Confucianism, there's something called the doctrine of the mean, which is translated in various ways, because it's the different translators all translate it differently, because it comes out conceptually different in Chinese to English. So the idea anyway is the same idea, to maintain balance and harmony, just like you see people doing this what's that, taekwondo, and they're trying to all balanced and in harmony. Everything should be in harmony, so that the mind is in a state of constant equilibrium. It is a path that not just for keeping the body balanced, literally balanced so that you don't fall over, and not just for keeping the diet balanced, but in behavior and in attitude. This in Confucianism is considered the mark of a superior person, someone who can make decisions but is not reckless. He's not overly cautious and not overly reckless. And anyone can do this, but everyone should try to do this. And this doctrine of the mean in Confucianism, it represents moderation, as we just read in Bhagavad-gita. Rectitude, do you have a similar word in German? It means moral behavior. Objectivity, sincerity, honesty, and propriety. Propriety also means similar to moral behavior. The guiding principle is that one should never act in excess. Getting back to the Christian world, from St. Thomas Aquinas, who has very deeply influenced the lives of everyone in the Western world up to the present day, even though we don't know about it. We don't know about all the ideas of all the philosophers, but his teachings have been tremendously influential and continue to be so in forming the outlook of the Western world. So, he gave a lot of the philosophy to Christianity, because there's not much in Jesus' teachings itself. So he stated that Christian morality is consistent with the mean. Keep in the middle, don't be excessive. He says that evil consists in discordance from the rule or measure of the mean. Now, this means either the same thing, either too much or too little. If you go too much in excess or too much in lacking, then we're not in the middle. Most prominently in the teachings of any of the great teachers of the past is in this middleness. Is, any guesses? 3, 2, 1. Buddha-dev. The middle path. We should live on the middle path. The Noble Eightfold Path tells us the middle path. It means that we should avoid all extremes in behavior. At the time, so we are told, at the time when Buddha-dev was in this world, within society at that time, there were some people who were extremely materialistic and interested in accumulating lots of money and luxury and all this kind of thing. And on the other hand, there were some people who, in reaction to this, had become extremely renounced. And you still see some people like that in India, especially if you go to the Kumbh Mela. You can find some yogi who's kept his hand in the air for the last 20 years, so it's all, what's that called? Atrophied, that's the word. Doesn't work anymore. And the nails are all growing out and it looks grotesque. So this kind of severe austerity, as to show that we don't have anything to do with materialistic society, that is an extreme reaction. So Buddha, he recommended a middle path. Don't be extremely materialistic, but don't go to the opposite extreme either. We should follow the noble eightfold path that teaches us to be normal and reasonable. Just wait a minute. I'll get, I'm not teaching Buddhism, actually. I'm just coming to the point. So, everything we should do should be fair and right. We should be normal and reasonable in our speech, action, emotion, determination, ways of living, and so on. It means that we should be neutral, upright, and centered. It means to investigate and penetrate the core of life and all things with an upright, unbiased attitude. In order to solve a problem, we should position ourselves on neutral, upright, and unbiased ground. We investigate the problem from various angles, analyze the findings, understand the truth thoroughly, and find a reasonable conclusion. Okay, this is taken from the internet. I want to investigate this a little bit. So we talked about the middle path. Now maybe I'll come back to it. I'll read more from the great internet, and I'll come back to that a little later. So the middle path in Buddhism does not mean having a biased view or a superficial understanding. The middle path is a distinct theory and way of Buddhist practice that is not common to other religions. Its high moral values laying great emphasis on thought and action in dealing with the natural environment. It is concerned with the relationship between thoughts and behavior, and the relationship between behavior and its consequences. So here are a few of the teachings that come out of all of this, by which we can understand the essence of Buddhism, because it shouldn't be extreme. So one teaching is that it, the undefined it, which, whatever it is not one nor different. Okay, go and think about it. It is not permanent nor discontinuous. It is not coming nor going. It neither exists or not exists. Because you see, you don't want to be too extreme. So if you say something exists, that's an absolute statement. If you say something doesn't exist, that's another absolute statement. So better to say it neither exists nor does it not exist. So this is there is neither dharma nor non-dharma. The Buddha also said, in whatever language he spoke, is given here in English, if we can see the truth of the causes of worldly sufferings, we will not be attached to the view of nothingness. If we can see the truth of cessation in the world, we will not be attached to worldly existence. By avoiding the two extremes, the Tathagata, which means he who went there, although he's still sitting in the middle of us. The Tathagata teaches us the middle path, which is what this is, that is, this arising, that arises. Okay, I hope you're thoroughly confused. So, now there's a problem. There are certain problems with these philosophical problems with the idea of following the middle path, which have been observed by various philosophers. Now, on the whole, we can say it's an appealing idea, is it not, to be in the middle? You don't want to be an extremist, do you? You want to be this pulling out a gun and shooting people, kidnapping school children. Well, that's the pits, isn't it? How low can you go? I don't think anyone even thought of that before. So, what's the opposite to being an extremist? To being a complete pacifist, total pacifist. Okay, let them come and capture the school children and we won't resist. So that doesn't seem like a very good philosophy either. That was Mahatma Gandhi's idea, non-violence. So, it's not a very practical philosophy. His disciple, supposed to be Nehru, became the Prime Minister of India, and he was trying to be non-violent, and in the meantime China comes in and just annexes part of the Indian state. So if you want to be totally non-violent, then people who don't agree with that will just come in and take you over. So some violence is required. It's very nice to say we should be non-violent, but a middle position is better here. That violence, as is described in Srimad Bhagavatam, nati hinsa, not excessive violence. Some is required. Just like sometimes, some years ago in some state in America, the police went on strike, and then immediately all the crooks were out looting. So violence or the threat of it may be required, is required. Okay. There's a philosophical problem with this, because you can take two positions and say, well, let's take the middle. But it doesn't seem to work very well. For instance, if you say someone is taken to court for the crime he was caught stealing bubble gum from a shop. So then there was a discussion on how to sentence him. And one lawyer suggested that he should be hung, drawn, and quartered. You know what that means? It means you should be hung for some time till you're on. This was part of my Christian education at school. That what the Protestants used to do to the Catholics. They didn't teach us what the Catholics used to do to the Protestants. So they'd hung you for some time, and then they would, till you're almost dead, then they'd pull out your limbs till they're all dislocated, and then they'd chop you up in 4 pieces. So that's one possible punishment for stealing bubblegum. So another lawyer might say, well, that's a bit extreme. Why don't we just shoot him dead? So what's the compromise? Just torture him for half an hour and then shoot him. Is that a good compromise? No, it's not a good compromise. Because who's to say where do you set the goalposts? Whatever position you say, you can say, okay, we come to a compromise, but then someone can object to that, and then you make another compromise in between those two positions. Some other examples of how this doesn't work. One person says that there's a chasm 100 meters wide, and someone says we should build a bridge across it. And someone else says, no, we shouldn't build a bridge across it. And so someone else comes along and says, okay, let's make a compromise. We'll build a bridge 50 meters. It doesn't work, does it? Now, these are some funny examples. I have a few more funny examples here. Okay, a man says, I want to buy a computer. His wife says, you're not going to buy a computer? So they make a compromise. They buy half a computer. We get the CPU and the keyboard and forget everything else because we're making a compromise. All right, now coming to more like real life issues. Someone says slavery is wrong. Someone says, no, there is a case for slavery. Doesn't mean that there is, because someone says there is a case for slavery, we have to go along with that and argue a position in the middle. Similarly for pornography, someone says that, well, all pornography should be stopped. And someone says, no, it's, what is that, artistic rights? That's the excuse that they used to use when I was a kid. So someone may say, well, then we'll have it only for adults. But it avoids the question of whether pornography is allowable at all, or if it's not an affront to human civilization. Some things to try to make a middle position, in some cases it's absurd, and in other cases it misses the point of whether something is absolutely right or wrong. Just like with this 200 schoolgirls kidnapped, so they may make a compromise and give 100 back. Is that a good compromise? No, it's not a good compromise. So this idea of being in the middle, there are various problems with that. Even though Buddhism, there's an elaborate, or actually many elaborate systems of philosophy, which is supposed to uphold the middle path, without knowledge of what is actually the purpose of life, without clear knowledge of what should be and what shouldn't be, if we argue a middle position between what we perceive as two extremes, then that's only our own understanding. And our own understanding is not in itself necessarily linked with reality. We are in ignorance. This world is a world of ignorance. So from a platform of ignorance, if we argue about a middle position between two positions of ignorance, we still end up with ignorance. So the idea that they say here, that we analyze the findings, we understand the truth thoroughly, well, that suggests that a priori we have knowledge of what is the truth. But if we say we're seeking for the truth and we just presume it's in the middle of what we think are two extreme positions, that means that we presume that we already know what the truth is. This is called technically in Sanskrit the Arohana Pantha, which means that we are stuck down here in this world of ignorance, and we think by our own effort, by our own analysis, by our own logical and what we consider to be reasonable deliberation, that we can understand what is the truth. So that whole process is, in the Vedic process, that whole process is rejected from the beginning. That we can find the truth just by analyzing and saying it's not this, it's not that, it's something in the middle. So, finding my way through my notes here. So, even in the Vedic literature, we find some things like that. There's this saying in Sanskrit, Chanakya Pandit, actually. Yeah. Ati rupena vaisita, ati garvena ravanaha, ati danad balya badho, hi ati sarvatra varjayat. Ati means excessiveness. So ati sarvatra varjayat means that everywhere, which means everywhere in all cases, extremeness should be forsworn, should be given up. And the examples are given that because Sita was so beautiful, she got kidnapped. So the answer is, don't be too beautiful. By too much pride, Ravana was destroyed. Then by too much charity, Bali was destroyed. Now, from a worldly point of view, this might be quite good advice, but this is against the Vaishnava principle. Sita's beauty, we're not going to say that Sita should be less beautiful. She's eternally beautiful. She should be beautiful. She is beautiful. And Bali gave everything away, everything that he had. That is his great glory. It's not... From the external point of view, he was completely destroyed. But actually, that is his great glory. So, this middle part, always being in the middle, that doesn't seem to fit with Vaishnava philosophy. Now, I started this class by reading from Bhagavad-gita, in which Krishna speaks about moderation. Now, am I speaking against that? No. Moderation in eating and sleeping, and generally in one's life, that is suitable for practicing yoga or even for living in this world. It should be intelligently applied, but it's not in and of itself a philosophical system. Again, we're in the world of ignorance, we're in the world of untruth, and what we perceive to be balanced is by its very nature imbalanced. Just like we might say that a balanced person living in Munich, he or she, as you're supposed to say, because to say he is imbalanced, so you have to say he or she. Although for generations used to say he, and it was understood that it meant he or she. So we should be balanced. What should we say? Something in between. It. Okay, there was a German human, we're not going to say whether it was male or female. It. So if the it, the man or woman or something in between, transvestite maybe, they get up in the morning and they brush their teeth and they go to work, they do their work well, they come back, they watch the football game, they drink a beer, and they live a very balanced life, what you might say a normal, ideal German citizen, contributing to the nation. So we may say it's very balanced, but from the spiritual point of view, such a life is totally useless. It's not balanced, it's zero or less. Because there's no knowledge, it's all in ignorance. The knowledge of the purpose of life is completely missing. Krishna here speaks that one should live a moderate life so that one can practice yoga, not so that simply one can be some dumb fool, dummkopf. What's that word? Dummkopf, is it? Fool. Who just lives life in a way that seems very balanced and normal, but it never asks whether there's any purpose to life any more than being a normal, good citizen. It doesn't realize, I'll say he, it's more personal, he or she, he or she doesn't realize that we are eternal, living, spiritual beings. We're not meant for suffering in this world. However balanced you try to make the situation of this world, you can't avoid birth, death, old age and disease. There is suffering in this world. And you can be balanced as much as you like, but you have to suffer this again and again and again till we find the solution. So we're not saying that balance is completely wrong or off. That is recommended here by Krishna, and we find in Mahabharata, for instance, there is a narration of Yudhishthira speaking about the dispensation of justice, that the king, if he's too strict, too harsh in dispensing justice, in other words, for stealing bubblegum, you might get shot. If he's so strict, then the citizens will come to hate him. And if he's too mild, then no one will follow him and criminals will prosper. So there has to be a balance. So that's sensible advice, isn't it? But the ultimate advice we find in Bhagavad-gita is Sarvadhaman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. Leave behind all these worldly ideas and simply surrender to me. Now that might seem completely imbalanced. Surrender completely to Krishna. What's the in-between? The in-between, if we want to make a compromise between not surrendering to Krishna and surrendering to Krishna, it's like multiplying 1 by 0. If we say not surrendering to Krishna is 0 and surrendering to Krishna is 1, then by multiplying 1 by 0, you get 0. In other words, you get punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jartare shayanam. You get, as long as we don't surrender to Krishna, we get born again and again and again in this material world. And that goes on until we fully surrender to Krishna. So we may say that there's an in-between position, but that in-between, in some sense there's in-between. If someone is a pious person, and he acknowledges Krishna, but at the same time is interested in enjoying this material world, then he can go to the heavenly planets. But that's not a halfway in between. That's like an example can be given. You're either in the prison or you're not in the prison. So in the prison, if you behave as a good prisoner, you don't make riots and you don't attempt to assault the prison wardens, and you're cooperative and polite, then they might give you some facilities. They might allow you to have a computer in your cell, but you're still in the prison. Whereas the more rowdy prisoners, they may be put in solitary confinement or chained up in their cells. So the prisoner who cooperates, but he's still in prison. There's an distinct difference between being in prison and not being in prison. So in the same way, if one surrenders to Krishna, one gets out of this material world, which is like a prison. And if one doesn't surrender to Krishna, one may have a somewhat better position within the material world. If one doesn't surrender to Krishna but is somewhat pious, he may have a better position. But the overall effect is that we're stuck in a situation of gross suffering. So Krishna's ultimate direction in Bhagavad-gita is to give up all materialistic ways of thinking, and the highest stage of Krishna consciousness is described in Srimad Bhagavatam. There are various. Evang rata sapriyanama kircha jatanuraga juta chitta uchai hasatyata rodito gayati nrityati unmadava nrityati lokabhaya. That is described that someone who becomes fully Krishna conscious, they become mad with love of God, as if mad. And they dance, they sing, they cry, they call out, without caring for outsiders. That doesn't sound very balanced. Doesn't sound very balanced, but that is the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to become what is considered mad with love of Krishna. So, balance has its usefulness within this world, but actually if we're to come out of this world, we have to realize that by its very nature, this world is imbalanced. The very nature of this world is that everything here is it's not properly tuned. We're in a wrong position. So to try to find ultimate balance in a place which is itself imbalanced is the wrong endeavor. Rather, we should go to that place which is perfectly balanced. The perfect balance is to be fully in Krishna consciousness, to fully surrender to Krishna. That is proper balance. Often I'm asked, how can we have a balance between our material duties and our spiritual life? And I reply what is the balance? The balance is savadhaman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. The balance is no material life, because there's nothing good in material life whatsoever. So we should be fully spiritual. Of course, how we practically practice that in this world, that we have to see. We can't ignore the fact that we are presently in this material world. But we should understand that simply to have some balanced mental state, that is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to fully surrender to Krishna, and that is balance. Then we're in our proper position. Our proper position is that of servants to the Supreme, who is Krishna. So, balance here is recommended in Bhagavad-gita, but it's not the idea of being balanced in this world is not the ultimate understanding. And if you try to make this as the ultimate understanding, then you'll find, even philosophically, there are so many problems with that. Just like building the 50-meter bridge. The problem is starting from a position of ignorance, trying to do some induction, and thinking that you can come up with the truth. But rather we should understand that the truth exists independently of how we try to measure it. So we should try to understand the truth as it is, as He gives it to us, and not mentally speculate and come up with theories that are ultimately absurd. I spoke about this ahimsa, non-violence. That's promoted by officially, and that's supposed to be, according to Buddhism, ahimsa paramadharma. That the highest religion or way of life is non-violence, but it's impractical. You can't live in this world without some violence. That's why we see in Sri Lanka they had a long war which was recently terminated. The Buddhists fighting against the Tamils, Tamil Hindus, Christians and Muslims. So it's a nice idea, but it's not possible in this world. So rather than talking about finding a middle path, one should try to find what is the real path. Because what we consider to be the middle is going to be wrong, because we are not the arbiters of the truth. The truth exists independently of us. Okay, there are a few thoughts about balance. We should lead a balanced life in this world in pursuit of the supreme truth. But to pursue such a life in and of itself, by most people, will be considered imbalanced. The person who thinks that to go to work every day and come home and drink a beer, that is a balanced, normal way of life, will see even the attempt to pursue the ultimate truth as being imbalanced. So where's the compromise? Pursue the truth as a hobby, but it can't be just a hobby. To pursue the truth has to be full absorption. It doesn't happen just by tinkering around with it. In fact, anything in this world, of anything which is considered a high attainment, if someone wants to be an Olympic boxing champion or archery champion or swimming champion, they have to completely be absorbed in that, literally day and night. They don't live a very balanced life. They have to be training all the time. Their eating is completely regulated. They can't eat whatever they like. They have to have regulated resting. They have to pursue it with just one-pointed focus. Similarly, if one wants to be a political leader, you just have to be absorbed in it. You can't get a position of being a big political leader without leading a life that, compared to other people's lives, is imbalanced. You have to really get into it. So in spiritual life, one has to be completely absorbed in that. Materialistic people will say that it's good for an athlete to completely concentrate on success in athletics, or they take it as normal that a businessman will be completely absorbed in business and a politician completely absorbed in politics. But they think it's imbalanced if someone wants to dedicate their life for spiritual upliftment. So that's what we're doing. We want to attain Krishna. That requires complete absorption. And what materialistic people in their ignorance talk of as balance, we don't subscribe to that. So, Hare Krishna, any question about this, please? Questions, comments, and objections are also welcome, as long as the objections are balanced. Or let's say at least they should be somewhat intelligent. Yes, please.
Maharaj, what is the difference between extremity and being very serious in Krishna consciousness?
What is the difference between extremity and being very serious in Krishna consciousness? That's an intelligent question. It can be a question of perspective. I myself am often, I've heard within this movement referred to as an extremist. But I would prefer to think that I'm just trying to practice seriously. Extremism is, all these terms are obviously like serious and extreme. They are subjective terms. We do have an objective understanding of what it means to be serious in Krishna consciousness, and that objectivity means the instructions that we have from Srila Prabhupada. From our perspective, that's objective. It's not just someone's opinion, it's what Srila Prabhupada gave us. That includes rising early every day, chanting minimum of 16 rounds, following 4 regulated principles. Now some people would call that extreme. So what is extreme? It depends where you want to, whatever position someone is in, they will call someone else's position extreme. So, what we've practically seen in our movement over the last 25 years or so, is that what was considered normal and proper in following of Krishna consciousness when Srila Prabhupada was personally present is now considered extreme. That means that the idea of practicing Krishna consciousness very seriously has become compromised. And so what was considered the minimal standard is now considered a very high standard, and some people call it extreme also. All these things, what is extreme, what is balanced, actually that isn't really our outlook at all. We just want to see if Krishna is satisfied. That's our standard, not a subjective standard of being balanced or imbalanced. If Krishna is pleased, everything is perfect. However balanced and normal and reasonable we might appear to others, if Krishna is not satisfied with us, then what is the use? And if others think that we are crazy, extreme, fundamentalist, dinosaur, and so on, but Krishna is pleased, then our life is perfect. And practically, although we may like to present ourselves as being balanced and normal and moderate and reasonable and all these kind of terms, bipolar, what is that? There's bipolar disorder and bipolar, I guess that means there should be a bipolar order, in order. Actually, if we're going to surrender to Krishna, then definitely most of the people of the world will think that we're crazy. So with the idea that therefore we shall try to act in such a way that the people of the world don't think that we're crazy, but then you can't surrender to Krishna. It's like where's the balance? Where is the balance? What is the balance? There's some things which don't balance out. When I say, well, I'll surrender to Krishna, but at the same time, so that people don't think we're crazy, we'll be more normal. So we'll watch television, and we'll play soccer, and we'll send our children to schools which teach us that we are combinations of molecules and nothing else. But then you might be more balanced in the view of ignorant people, but you lost your Krishna consciousness along the way. So this is our aim, to become dear to Krishna. And we may think that, okay, that seems a bit extreme. All right, let me make some compromise. Then we have to come back again to this material world. As long as we're not prepared to take that step to surrender to Krishna, whatever the reasoning for that might be, being balanced, being moderate, being normal, and so on, then we have to take birth again. And it can go on for life after life after life. At some point, after many, many lives, we have to say, okay, I'm finished with all this balanced, reasonable, normal, and I'm just going to surrender to Krishna. And then we can go back to Godhead. But in the meantime, as we're going round and round in the cycle of birth and death, we contact different modes of nature. Karanam guna sangosya sadasadyoni janmasu. Then we become a demon. We become, even from the materialist's point of view, imbalanced. We become someone who might join, for instance, a kidnapping of school children gang. And even what we considered balanced, we even go beyond that, because that's the nature of the material world. We come in contact with different modes of nature. So in Krishna consciousness, if something is good, is ultimately good, then there's no excess of it. There's goodness. Can we say there's excess goodness? No. There should be that kindness. No, but that should be balanced and applied intelligently also. An example of intelligently applied kindness. Srila Prabhupada told an example from Calcutta in the sometime in the 20th century. It's a long time span. So when he was living with his family in Calcutta, he heard some screaming from the next house. Wah! And he was wondering what's going on. Why a child is screaming? What's going on? A child is being tortured? What's going on? So the system is, if you want to find out what's going on in the next house, if it's a sensitive matter, you send the servant to inquire, because previously people used to have servants before they had washing machines and things like that. They had servants. You had servants in your home in India? Yes. In Germany? No. So, is life better in Germany or India? Just think about it. So you send the servant, it's the underground connection. The servant asks the servant in the next house, and then you get the news. So, why the child is screaming? His mother was punishing him very severely. What did he do? The boy who was being punished because his elder brother had typhoid. In typhoid, taking solid food is totally proscribed. It can lead to death. So the boy was starving. The mother was starving him. That's what you have to do in typhoid. So in the house, parathas were being cooked. If you don't know what parathas are, you've wasted 90% of your life. You can get them offered to go on a time. Then you can find out. So it's a very... even while it's being cooked, you can smell it being cooked. And it smells very nice, and it is very nice. So parathas were being cooked, And the elder boy, who was forcibly being starved, he asked his younger brother, steal some parathas, bring them to me. So the younger boy did, and he was caught in the act of espionage, in the act of stealing parathas. His mother caught him, and she understood this is meant for the older brother, and she beat her own son very severely for the crime of stealing parathas, because by doing so he could have killed his elder brother. So that is an example of intelligently applied kindness. That you starve the elder brother and you punish the younger brother who's trying to be kind. So what we consider to be kind can actually be violence. And I often give the example of Mother Teresa, who's very famous as being a great welfare worker. Although there were at the same time as Mother Teresa, and still are in the world, plenty of welfare workers who are doing comparable work, but they just don't have such a good hype around them. So, one of the things she was famous for was taking people off the street in Calcutta when they're about to die. They've been living on the street all their life, and she would take them off. She'd have her nuns go around, and if anyone looked like they were dying, she'd take them in her home, and they'd die in her home. And if they got better, they'd be out on the street again. So, what is the actual benefit of this? Similarly, helping the poor. What is the actual benefit? Even Jesus himself said, the poor will always be with us. People are poor, they've got that position because of some sinful activity they've performed in a previous life. And if you try to help them, that's a very nice idea. We're not saying we're against trying to help the poor, but that does not in itself constitute the highest saintliness, because you may be poor, you may be rich, but when we die, we have to take another birth in this world. So really helping people is not to try to alleviate their poverty-stricken condition. We're not saying it shouldn't be done, but it doesn't help them in the fullest sense. The fullest sense is to give them knowledge of the spiritual reality of their relationship with Krishna, by which they don't have to get born again. So, advertising that this bodily welfare work is the highest saintliness, it's actually an obstruction to helping people make real spiritual progress. Because if we think that simply helping the body is the greatest help we can do to others, it just misses the point, uncovers the point, that we are spiritual living beings. We don't belong in this material world at all. Poverty, richness, everyone is suffering. In fact, as far as I've seen, the rich people seem to be suffering more than the poor people, in many cases. So, basically, all the ideas of what is right, what is good, what is moral, what is reasonable, they're all from the platform of ignorance of what is actual reality, what is the actual purpose of life. So in ignorance, if we try to help others, at best, we might not harm them further. But usually our attempts, in ignorance, when we attempt to help others, we usually make their condition worse. This whole thing of opening hospitals, and of course you don't think about that in Europe because you have enough hospitals already built, but in the poor countries, opening hospitals and feeding the poor, alright, that's something that civilized people should do. Alright, that's okay, but to advertise it as being the highest standard of saintliness, this is just misleading. It increases the ignorance, which is the very cause of our suffering in this material world anyway. So, Hare Krishna. That was a long answer to your question. Just elaborating on some more points. There are some basic things to be understood. One point, this body is temporary. Everyone can understand. But I am eternal. When the body dies, I don't die. Before this body was born, I existed. Without knowing this, the whole civilization is totally misled. What is the purpose of life? It's just complete ignorance, so that you think that simply to increase our bodily comfort that's the purpose of life. But anyway, it's going to die soon. Who am I? And no one's asking. A totally ignorant and misguided civilization. All ideas are wrong. All the philosophy, all the aim of life, everything is completely wrong. By missing the basic point, then everything else you do is just all wrong. That's all. Massive ignorance. 2,000 years of cultivation of deep ignorance, and they're proud of it. That shows more foolishness. That doesn't sound like a very balanced statement, does it? Well, is it correct or is it not correct? What happens when the body dies? Do we continue to exist or do we not continue to exist? It's either one or the other. What is true? According to Buddhism, there's neither existence nor non-existence, but this doesn't make any sense at all. So we should investigate this, and the fact is that we do continue to exist. So to put all the emphasis on this brief life, it's absurd. Just to pamper this body and mind, it's absurd. To try to find balance in a totally imbalanced world, to try to find the middle position between two insane positions, it doesn't make any sense. So any other question, comment, or protest? Yes? Hare Krishna. That's the answer? Now what's the question?
Maybe everything. So the question is, or it's one observation, that here in the secular modern world, the worldview is completely different from the traditional one that is, at the base of one ashram.
Right. You're making very broad statements, but we can accept that as valid. The modern secular worldview is very different from the traditional one, and you're specifically referring to that of Varnashram.
Yeah.
Although,
Because here we're struggling still to implement that, but one of...
To implement Varnashram, you're struggling to implement it? Thank you.
So,
most of our movement's given up on it.
sorry?
I'm saying thank you for struggling to implement Varnashram, because most of our movement seems to have given up on it. So thank you for doing that.
So my question is, how can we learn in order to preach effectively, and not to appear to be fanatic or extremist, as you said?
Yeah. It's very difficult not to appear fanatical or extremist when we're trying to present Krishna consciousness, which is so different to the whole outlook of the world today. Actually, I've written a whole book about this. I have one copy here. It's called On Speaking Strongly in Srila Prabhupada's Service. And it does cover, I'll read out some of the chapter titles. One of the chapter titles is called Fanaticism and Fundamentalism. Another is Absolutism, Relativism, Conservatism, Liberalism. Another chapter title is Scientific, Not Dogmatic. So Srila Prabhupada often spoke about being Krishna consciousness is scientific. So we should present scientifically, not just dogmatically. Here, what I've spoken today might sound quite dogmatic, because I presumed that most of the people present here more or less accept what we accept as the axioms of Krishna consciousness. But if I was to speak to people who didn't accept that, then we have to present in a scientific way. As we see Srila Prabhupada, he usually began his speaking, the topic he would first of all introduce is that the body is temporary. We are eternal spiritual beings. We are different from the body. Now that is not a fanatical approach. That is something which we can understand intelligently. So if I just come in and say that anyone who doesn't believe in reincarnation is a fool, it's true, but if we say that without explaining it, then it won't help the fools to become less foolish. It's not me who said they're a fool. Krishna says it in Bhagavad-gita. Utkramantam stitang vapi bhunjanam va gunanvitam vimudha nanu pashanti jnana chakshusha. Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita that those who do not see how we change from body to body and how we are situated in the bodies now under the influence of the three modes of material nature, Krishna doesn't say they're fools, he says they're very great fools, vimudha. They don't see it through the disciplic succession. Those who have the eyes of knowledge, they can see. So we can present it scientifically. And actually, even from what would be called the actual scientific. When we say scientific, then people who consider themselves scientific say we're misusing the word scientific. But actually there have been extensive investigations by scientists into the nature of reincarnations, and they have given what in another field would be accepted as good scientific evidence that there is reincarnation, but it's not accepted, because those who are supposed to be scientific are not scientific. They only say they're scientific. But actually the name of Ian Stevenson is well known as a scientist who in a scientific way presented extensive evidence for the reality of the phenomenon of reincarnation. So that's one point Srila Prabhupada would always emphasize. First of all, to understand that we are not the body. Another point which Srila Prabhupada always presented, and again this is not fundamentalism, this is scientific or something that any intelligent person should be able to understand, is that we are not independent, we are controlled. There are laws of nature by which we are controlled. We can't stop getting old. You can do yoga, you can have a good diet, you can put cream, but you can't stop the wrinkles coming on your face. And you can't stop death. So there are laws by which we are controlled, which suggests that there is a higher order controlling us. There is a controller. So in this way, this should not come under the claim of being fundamental or fanatic. But anyway, people who don't want to accept what we have to say, they'll put some label on it. Fundamental, fanatic, extremist, and chuck it in the waste bin and forget it. Just like with this Ian Stevenson's investigations. And there are many examples in the world of so-called science of people with all scientific credentials who discover something which the orthodoxy of science doesn't want to believe, and they just reject it, which just goes to show that the world of science is not so scientific. But anyway, anyone who wants to preach anything, I'm not just talking about Krishna consciousness here, then someone is going to object. whatever it is, even if it's something. Well, there are very good examples. There are many people in the world who want to promote that we should have a more so-called green way of life, which seems to be a very good proposition. But there are many people who are very much opposed to that. So if you just want to be your average balanced person who goes to work in the morning, comes back, drinks a beer, watches football on TV, then you might not have any opposition. But if anything you want to present, you're going to have some opposition. So if our aim is to live peacefully, then we probably shouldn't try to preach Krishna consciousness. Or even practice Krishna consciousness. Internal peace will be there, but peacefulness, that kind of peacefulness, that just means to be mediocre. So, anyway, I made this book because I got fed up of people calling me fundamental and all this kind of thing, when I'm just trying to... I listen to what Srila Prabhupada says, and I try to intelligently represent that. And like I say, the position of our movement has shifted, so that what was considered normal and proper 30 years ago is now considered fanatical. But I would prefer to think, to say it in a very reasonable way, that the manner and style of presenting Krishna consciousness that Srila Prabhupada exemplified and told us to follow, on which there are many examples of him being personally pleased with, I'd rather stick to that. I'd rather please Srila Prabhupada than others who I'm not sure if they are pleasing Srila Prabhupada. So there are many considerations. Public opinion, it's all discussed in here, if you'd like to go through it. It is an important question for our movement, because our movement has definitely become more mild in many ways. If it's better for that, I don't think so. Can we make a compromise between the two positions? You can try. But really our whole aim is yasya prasadad bhagavat prasado yasya prasada nagati katopi. If Srila Prabhupada is pleased, then everything is perfect. If he's not pleased, then everything is useless. Even if the whole world says, oh, Hare Krishna, very nice, but if Srila Prabhupada is not pleased, then what's the use? Yeah, you want to say something else?
No, just as a kind of thought, that, just to kind of confirm that I understood you. So, is it that we need to discriminate between pleasing somebody and adapting our behavior? First of all, understanding the person that, we are standing...
Oh yeah, empathetic listening and all this kind of thing, yeah.
I mean, but not for the sake of the principle, but just for the sake of connecting.
Yeah, preaching means to communicate with people, that's a fact. But it's not always necessarily so that you have to make some empathetic connection with them to communicate with them. It's not necessarily true. There are many cases of Srila Prabhupada in the first time meeting people being very heavy with them. He got the point across. The job was done. There are many examples given in here. Just to give one, this was early 1970s, Los Angeles. Some hippie type person, but he wasn't really a hippie. He was actually doing his own business. He had long hair. He was earning quite a lot of money. Somehow he came to the temple came to visit. He was curious. And then he saw Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was there, and then he saw all the devotees bowing down, and he thought, I'm not going to bow down. And then he had some conversation with Prabhupada. It was quite short because Prabhupada was very heavy with him, and he just left. He was driving away and he was very angry, and so, what's this? Who's this person to be so heavy? But as he was going, gradually he was going, he thought, yeah, actually he's right. I'm an idiot, I'm proud. And he came back the next day with a check for $1,000, which in those days was a lot of money, especially for our devotees. So, and then he eventually became a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So I discuss all these things. If you're strong with people, it's a risk. They might accept it and have a transformation. Otherwise, if you're just nice with people, how are you? Nice to see you. You can go on for years like that. At some point you have to say, look, this is right, this is wrong. What do you want? So when you say that, they might run away. Or they might have the transformation which it has to happen at some point, either in this life or in millions of lifetimes. And even those that go away, then often they'll think about it, and because they're not used to people dealing with them like that. So, like what could be called extremism, that's like can be putting people on the spot and making them, okay, what do you want to do? Now you decide, what do you want to do with your life? You want to go on in this ignorance, or you want to make progress in Krishna consciousness? Put them on the spot. Otherwise, like I say, go on for years and years and years. And we often see that in our temples, that people come every Sunday or every once a month or something, and they just, Haribol, how are you? And it just goes on like that for years and years and years. And there's no spiritual advancement. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm so inquisitive. And Maharaj, do you know what is behind this kind of mediocre, anti-authoritative education that's promoted nowadays so much?
Sorry, what's behind mediocrity and education that's promoted?
What's behind this mediocre?
Mediocrity is, to get down to the root, it's envy of Krishna, lack of desire to surrender to Krishna. Some advice. Okay. Yeah.
Maharaj, where to get the strength to speak the truth? How to be?
Strength to speak the truth. In one purport, which one is that? That's in the first canto, second chapter of Bhagavatam. I'm trying to remember which verse it is, but there's, I believe that's dharma sahi apavargasya nartotaya upakalpate. Nartasya, what is that? Nartasya dharmaikantasya kamo labhaya hi smritaha. The verse says that dharma or religion is meant for following for the sake of liberation. Dharma sahiyapavargasya narta, not for the sake of simply getting money for sense gratification. And one's aim of life should not be sense gratification. So that's fair. So in the purport, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember it exactly, but Srila Prabhupada says that persons who are searching after the absolute truth, they don't engage in sense gratification because they're completely overwhelmed with the search for the absolute truth. In other words, their whole consciousness is so overwhelmed by the need to utilize their life for attaining the truth, which is described in the verse after that. What is that truth? Vedanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yadjnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavanati shabhyate. So, in the same way, we can get the impetus to speak the truth if we ourselves are absorbed in that. Then we won't be satisfied with mediocrity. It doesn't mean we're impolite, but we just can't be satisfied with simply, hello, how are you, have a nice day. It's more intense. When we are absorbed in seeking the truth, who is Krishna, then we can't simply be satisfied on a platform of mediocrity, and we'll want to speak in a manner that will communicate the truth. How to do that in various situations, then we'll have to take We'll have to understand how to do that. Yeah. Anything?